Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the distinguished lecture featuring Derek B. Hall. He will be speaking about the plants and animals of the Nevada National Security Site today. You'll know that also as the former Nevada test site. So we're excited to have Derek here to speak about this fascinating topic. And it's wonderful to have you all here taking time out of your nice Saturday afternoon to be with us for this talk. So what I want to do is get into Derek's background a little bit to give you an idea of who he is, and then we'll bounce over to him for his presentation. Derek here is actually brought his specimens, his animal and plant specimens, to show us what those actually look like, which I think is a great touch from him. So one thing I want to do is talk about his background, as I said. Now, Derek Hall is a principal scientist with Mission Support Test Services, contractor to the U.S. Department of Energy. Derek graduated with a bachelor's and master's degree from Brigham Young University and has worked at the Nevada National Security Site since 1994. He has conducted studies on a variety of animal species, from mosquitoes to mountain lions, as well as several plant species, and leads the vegetation efforts on the NNSS. In his spare time, he enjoys spending time with his family and many outdoor activities like hunting, fishing, backpacking, and camping. Now, we are excited to announce that this is our first hybrid distinguished lecture here at the museum. It's being both streamed through Zoom and YouTube, and it's actually taking place right here at the National Atomic Testing Museum. Needless to say, Derek here is playing the role of a guinea pig today with all of us. So it's my pleasure on behalf of the National Atomic Testing Museum staff, as well as the Nevada Test Site Historical Foundation Board of Trustees, to welcome Derek B. Hall here to talk about the plants and animals of the Nevada National Security Site. Thank you so much.
Nuclear treaty verification and detecting and deterring nuclear threats, both here on site, or both here in the United States as well as throughout the world. Okay. Yeah. Technical difficulties here. Sorry for that. So go back to the beginning. Okay. Sorry, we're having some technical difficulties, so we're going to go back. So I just need to figure out how to get back Alex onto the first slide. This one? Yeah. So start from scratch? Or So today I'd like my objective today is to describe the plant and animal diversity found on the site, and then highlight a few of the species that we have studied, like Beatley's milkvetch, the western burrowing owl, desert tortoise, and my favorite species, the mountain lion. So the Nevada National Security Site is formerly called the Nevada Test Site. It's located about 60 miles northwest of Las Vegas and encompasses 1,355 square miles, which is larger than the state of Rhode Island. It was established in 1951 for the purposes of testing nuclear devices, and the work done here was instrumental in helping end the Cold War between the United States and its allies and Soviet Russia. The mission has changed from testing nuclear devices now to focusing on protecting our national security through stockpile stewardship, nuclear treaty verification, and detecting and deterring nuclear threats both here in the United States as well as throughout the world. Okay, great. Sorry for the technical difficulties. That's why I'm a guinea pig, I guess. So the site is surrounded by the Nevada Test and Training Range and the Desert National Wildlife Range on the east and west and north, and by the Bureau of Land Management land on the south. Altogether, this encompasses about 6,000 square miles of publicly restricted access land. And this area also of the site is extremely arid. It's one of the driest ecosystems in North America, receiving about 4 to 9 inches of precipitation annually. And Alex, I don't know, it's having trouble going to the next slide. There we go. So the site is very biologically diverse. It ranges in elevation from 900 meters to 2,300 meters. It's uniquely situated. It straddles both the Mojave Desert to the south and the Great Basin Desert to the north, with a transition area, kind of that brownish area through the central and eastern portions of the site. There's been 10 vegetation alliances and 20 vegetation associations described. Most of these are shrublands. More than 800 plant species have been identified on the site. So again, very, very diverse. Only about 7% of the site has actually been disturbed, with the remainder being undisturbed. As I mentioned, there's been no public access, so no hunting, no logging, no mining, no off-road vehicle use, no outdoor recreation since the 1940s. So because of this, it contains some of the most pristine ecosystems in southern Nevada, and in many ways functions like a wildlife refuge. So if we look at this Google Earth image, you can kind of see some of the topographic diversity that we have here. There's a lot of open valleys like Frenchman Flat down here. You've got Yucca Flat up here and Jackass Flats. These are really big, broad, open valleys. You've got several smaller hills down around Mercury here, and then around CP. And then you have several mountain ranges. And so you have Skull Mountain and Little Skull Mountain. You've got Yucca Mountain here, Shoshone Mountain, Timber Mountain. And then you have the mesas, Paiute Mesa and Rainier Mesa up here in the northern part. And so very, very diverse topographically, as well as geologically. A lot of limestone as well as volcanic formations. Varied aspects and slopes. Aspect is really important. If you ever looked at a north-facing slope versus a south-facing slope, the vegetation is usually different. The rock size is different because the south-facing slopes receive more solar radiation, so they're warmer, drier. So different vegetation species grow there. And there's more freezing and thawing, and so the rock size is smaller because of the fracturing from the freezing and thawing. North-facing slopes usually less solar radiation, so they're cooler, moisture, not as much freezing and thawing, and so you have larger rock size. So again, just adds to that diversity of habitats. So let's just look through some of these pictures for the major ecoregions. This is a typical shot of Mojave Desert habitat with creosote bush, the larger green evergreen shrub there, and then the smaller shrubs there is white bursage. Those are typical vegetation for the Mojave Desert. And this is a very warm desert. Hot summers, cool winters. It rarely snows. This last year we did have a pretty good snow event in the end of January. Snow is rare and it typically lasts less than a day. The transition area between the Mojave and Great Basin deserts. This is Yucca Flat. This is typical vegetation with the darker area being the creosote or the blackbrush. So kind of this dark colored shrub is blackbrush. Most common species out there in the transition area. And then as you move down lower into the valley, you get more of a salt desert shrubland with saltbush species, winter fat, bud sage, and then at the very top you've got the playa, the barren lake bed. The barren lake bed becomes inundated with good events with rain and snow, and sometimes the water will last there for even up to a couple of months, but that's kind of rare. But that's kind of typical transition area. Then in the northern and western portions, we have the Great Basin Desert. The Great Basin Desert is warm summers and cold winters. Pretty much snows here every year, and at the higher elevations, you can actually have snow persisting for 3 to 4 months even up there. And sometimes the snow can get 2-3 feet deep up there. So you can see there's a lot of diversity in those different areas. So we're going to focus on plants for a minute. I had mentioned that there were more than 800 plant species that have been identified on the site, representing more than 67 families. Just a lot of different plants out there. 43 of these are sensitive or protected regulated. Sensitive just means that they're either threats that are known for them, or they're just rare, not much is known about them. So they want to just kind of keep an eye on them. They're not protected or listed or anything like that, but we just want to keep an eye on them so they don't become listed. Protected regulated species is one that actually is protected or regulated by law. So most of ours, we have some, like the cacti are protected from collection and things like that by state law. We even found a new species last year. Jeanette Perry and I found a population of Cloacius cryptantha. This species is only known from one other area in Nevada, Pearlite Canyon over by Beatty. And so we went over and searched that area, found the plant, looked at the habitat, realized we had similar habitat on the site. So we went and searched that area on site and actually found a plant that we sent to the expert, and he identified it as Cloacius cryptantha. So occasionally we even do find some new species, which is pretty cool. We have several endemic species, which just means that they're native to this area, and they only grow in this area. So a few of those, like the Cane Spring Suncup here, it was first found and described on the test site near Cane Spring, and that's why it's called the Cane Spring Suncup. It's a pretty amazing plant. It can grow to over 6 feet tall. So pretty amazing plant there. A couple other plants that we have type localities where the plant was first described and found. Nye milkvetch and Beatley's milkvetch as well were first found and described on the site. And in the 1950s, Brigham Young University was contracted to come and do the first assessment of plants and animals on the site. So they studied a lot through the 1950s and 60s. And then with the plants, Janice Beatley came on in the early 1960s. And she was a fabulous botanist, very well world-renowned botanist that described most of the species on the site. And so a lot of credit should be given to her. Her book and publications are still the primary authority of plants on the site. This is just kind of a list of the 22 sensitive species that are found here on site. We have a monitoring plan where we try and monitor for these species. We'll try and go out to populations of these species, known populations, and see if there's any threats or disturbance or impacts from DOE that we need to mitigate for. The other thing we do is before any surface disturbing work in an area, we'll go out and survey it, look for sensitive plants, sensitive animals, and try and mitigate any negative impacts to those populations. As I mentioned, Beatley's milk vetch was one. That upper right photo is where this plant was first discovered. It is the type locality for this species. This species only grows in the northern portions of the site and just off the site onto the Nevada Test and Training Range. It doesn't grow anywhere else in the world except for those places. It is a sensitive species, and a lot of work was done. Kevin Bloomquist and others sampled and did a lot of studies, as did Janice Beatley, and found that there were really no imminent threats to the species. And so Fish and Wildlife Service wanted to list it as a threatened or endangered species. And because of the data that we had in hand, we were able to show them that there really was no imminent threats to the species, and that precluded listing the species. And it's still doing really well. We're planning actually hopefully to go out this year and monitor a lot of those populations and compare it to the historical data. So shifting to the animals, more than 1,500 animals have been identified on the site. Most of these are invertebrates, so about 1,200 of those are invertebrates. The creepy crawlies, things like insects and spiders, scorpions, and even fairy shrimp, which is this kind of little critter right in here. We've got 3 or 4 species of fairy shrimp. Pretty amazing. They lay their eggs. They only live for about a week or 2. They lay their eggs that can be dormant for years. And when the right conditions come along, mainly temperature and moisture, like the dry lake beds, they'll hatch and become adults, and then they'll continue to lay their eggs. Fun fact about this, they actually took some of those eggs up into outer space, to the space station, exposed them to outer space environments, brought them back to Earth, and they were still viable. So pretty hardy species. Fairy shrimp, in large numbers, they provide a lot of good protein for shorebirds that come along and feed along those, especially around the dry lake beds. We also have 34 reptile species, 17 snakes, 16, that should be lizards, and 1 desert tortoise. We have 245 bird species known to occur, 45 mammal species, 15 bat species, and 267 of those are considered sensitive or protected regulated. And most of those obviously being the birds protected under the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. So let's look at some of the snakes that we have on the site. We have 17 different species. We've got 4 venomous species. So the night snake here, and then the sidewinder rattlesnake, and the speckled rattlesnake, and the lyre snake. I don't have a picture of that. The lyre snake and night snake are poisonous, but their venom is in large grooved teeth in the upper part of their jaws, and their jaws are so small that they really don't pose any threat to a human, which is nice. But the sidewinder and speckled rattlesnakes do, and so you have to be really careful, especially in the springtime as they're coming out of hibernation or during the summer. Definitely have to watch where you're going, where you're putting your feet and your hands. The gopher snake in the upper left is probably the most common snake. It's found throughout the whole entire site in all ecoregions. The king snake, bottom left, the black and white striped snake. This is a really pretty snake. It's called the king snake because it actually feeds on other snakes and can even kill and eat rattlesnakes. It seems to be immune to the venom of the rattlesnakes. The red racer and the striped whip snake on the right are close cousins. They're closely related. The red racer is found more in the southern parts of the site, lower elevations, and the striped whip snake more on the higher upper elevations, more in the Great Basin desert area. And probably the most colorful snake is the ringneck snake on the middle on the left, kind of a slate green backside, a bright orange belly, and then bright red on the underside of the tail. So just kind of some of the diversity that we have on the snakes. Moving to lizards, we've got 16 different lizard species. Some of those are shown here. And the upper two here, the juvenile chuckwalla, when I first found this thing here, I thought it was a different species because it just looks totally different than the adult chuckwalla. But it is actually the same species, just different coloration when it's young. So chuckwalla is the largest herbivorous lizard in North America, and they're pretty common more in the southern parts of the site, more in the Mojave Desert part. The side blotched lizard, the middle left, is the most common and abundant lizard that we have on the site. Then the desert spiny lizard here and the western fence lizard, again, closely related, but the spiny lizard inhabits more of the southern part, Mojave Desert areas into the transition, and the western fence lizard's only found in the higher elevations, so more of that Great Basin, maybe upper transition area. The banded gecko right here is a really cool, cool lizard. It's my mom's favorite because it reminds her of the gecko in the Geico commercials. So really pretty little lizard. The horned lizards over here, they're ant specialists, so they feed primarily on ants, and they're found throughout the entire site as well. One of the really cool lizard species that we have is the western red-tailed skink, and we not much had been known about this species in Nevada. In fact, no formal studies had been done until we started our study on this species in Nevada. It's found pretty much only in Nevada. It's found in southern Nevada. It doesn't occur further north. It's also found in Arizona and California. But again, not much was known about it. And so we decided to do a study, and kind of interesting, this is the same species, believe it or not. This is a hatchling western red-tailed skink, and this is what it turns into when it gets to be an adult. So you wouldn't even know those were the same species, but they go through a definite color change. So we trapped, we set 168, at 168 sites, we set these funnel traps. You kind of see it's kind of like a box that has a ramp, a mesh ramp, and we just kind of use the existing vegetation or rocks to kind of funnel the animals in, and they go up the ramp and then drop into the box, and so they can't get out. And so we use that technique at 160 sites throughout the whole site, and we found that we caught 38 of those individuals. This was almost as many skinks as had been recorded in all of Nevada. So we were pretty excited about those results. Got some great information, actually produced a publication on that. But not only that, we also discovered that we had another skink species, the Great Basin skink, this one here with the bright putel. And the green dots up here represent, the green triangles represent where we caught the Great Basin skinks. And then these pink or red dots represent where the western red-tailed skinks were caught. And you can see that this is the higher elevation areas. And so there was definitely a habitat partitioning going on where the Great Basin skinks were only found at those high elevation sites, moisture, cooler, whereas the western red-tailed skinks were only found at the middle elevation areas, drier, warmer sites. So definitely a habitat partitioning going on there. This is the desert tortoise. This is the only species that we have found commonly on the site that is actually protected under the Endangered Species Act. It's listed as a threatened species. Because of that, we have terms and conditions in a biological opinion that we have to follow. So anytime work is done, we have to do surveys to make sure that the desert tortoise is not negatively impacted. And so we'll go out and do clearance surveys, make sure there's no burrows or tortoises present. If there are, we try and mitigate any negative impact to those, try and avoid using those burrows. If there's a tortoise found, we'll move it off the project site and make sure it's protected while the project continues to make sure that the project can proceed, but the tortoise is also protected. It's only found on the southern third of the site, mainly in the Mojave Desert portion of the site. And we've actually done a couple of research projects for this species. The first one was a juvenile translocation study that we conducted. We released 60 juvenile tortoises onto our site. We've been tracking them since September of 2012. Currently, we have 18 left, and that survival rate is similar to what you'd find in a natural population. And we found that most of these have died from predation due to kit foxes and coyotes. And so the other interesting thing is twice as many females have been killed as males. And so we're kind of trying to figure out why that is. One of the things that we found, we took some samples and found that female tortoises smell different or have a different chemical composition than male tortoises. And so perhaps females are smellier than males. That's kind of our hypothesis, that maybe that's why they have a increased predation rate. But it's something that we're still trying to figure out and doing some research on. The other study that we're conducting or kind of wrapping up right now is the road study. So we average about 1 roadkill tortoise mortality a year. So that's the biggest impact to this species from DOE activities. And so we wanted to understand more the risk to these animals. How much time do they spend around roads? What's the risk of getting hit? Are there ways that we can change that and reduce the number of mortalities that we find? So we put transmitters, GPS transmitters on these guys and tracked them for 2 to 3 years. And so each color you can see there represents a different animal's movements. And some movements are pretty large, especially the males. They seem to move and cover a lot more ground than some of our females. We're still analyzing those data and hope to produce a publication here in the next year or so. We're collaborating with some great people to help us analyze the home ranges. And we've got literally tens of thousands of data points. So we're hoping to analyze those here in the next little while. So shifting over to birds, we have 22 species of raptors. That's hawks, eagles, and owls. 48 species of shorebirds and gulls. 22 species of waterfowl. 120 species of passerines or perching birds. And 2 game birds, the chukar and the Gambel's quail. All but 6 of these are protected under the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. So the chukar and the Gambel's quail are not protected federally, but they are protected by the state, regulated as game species. The 4 that have no protection are the pigeon, the Eurasian collared dove, the English house sparrow, and the European starling. Those are all invasive introduced species that really, they're way abundant and they don't need to be protected. We've had a couple of bald eagle sightings over the years, but very rare. So our largest bird is the golden eagle. They're fairly common, and they actually do nest on the site as well. The peregrine falcon lower left, the last few years we're starting to see more of this species, which is really exciting. They were actually endangered and threatened for a number of years due to mainly DDT, pesticide poisoning. But now, since that's been banned for a number of years, their populations are definitely increasing. So they're no longer listed, but we are seeing more on the site, which is pretty exciting. The zone-tailed hawk there, bottom middle, is one. Ron Warren was actually, one of my colleagues was able to find this and take a great picture. This is a species that's typically found south of Nevada, more in California and Mexico and Arizona and New Mexico. And we think that maybe due to climate change, some of these species are shifting their distribution more to the north. And so we're kind of keeping an eye on that to see if we start seeing more of that kind of movements with some of those more southern species coming up to the north on the site. Given the dryness of the site, it's amazing how many species of shorebirds and waterfowl that we find on the site. So you see like the great blue heron here, the white-faced ibis, tree full of great egrets that are typically found, again, around large bodies of water and wetlands. These were all taken at Camp 17 Pond, which is a perennial pond used for mainly construction purposes, for using water for construction purposes. So we've identified over 100 different species that use this pond and the Great Basin Desert portion of the site. Horses, deer, other animals use this. So it's really an important water source that we have on the site. But a lot of different birds. One of those is the western burrowing owl. You kind of see that down here, right here. And this is a species that's protected under the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, but it's also considered a national species of conservation concern. And so it's declining in many parts of its range, and so we wanted to kind of understand its status on the site. We didn't even know if they stayed on the site year round. We had some opportunistic observations. So we conducted a study over several years. We looked at its distribution and abundance around the site. We did monthly burrow monitoring for 3 to 4 years. We used motion activated cameras in front of the burrows to document reproduction. We analyzed over 1,600 regurgitated pellets to try and get a handle on what they were eating through all 4 seasons in all 3 ecoregions, and found some really cool stuff. We published a topical report and then a few other publications on that. One of the other really exciting things that we did was we're working with Dr. Courtney Conway at the University of Idaho. Some really neat new technology is these little satellite transmitters that you can put. They only weigh 5 grams. As a general rule, you don't want to put anything on an animal that's more than 5% of its body weight, because that can negatively impact that. So our owls average about 150 grams, and so 5% of that's about 7.5 grams. So these 5-gram transmitters definitely fit that. So they seem to be working pretty well. They have a little solar panel on the top of it, and that's what will recharge the battery. It communicates with the satellite, so it takes a location several times a day, and we can actually track the movements of these animals. Pretty easy to trap. You just put a one-way trap in front of their burrow. The animals go in and they can't get out. And so it's a really effective way to capture these guys. So we captured 7 of them. In June of 2019, we tracked them. We wanted to see when they leave, when they return, where do they spend the winter, how long does it take them to get to their wintering sites, do they come back for the summer? So really, we wanted to understand their migration ecology. Pretty interesting data. We found that 3 of our owls spent the winter in Southern California. Down here, this is the Salton Sea. And 3 of them even went down to Baja, Mexico. So these pink push pins represent the wintering locations of our 7 owls. And we actually had one that stayed on the site for the winter. But that's, several hundred miles that they're traveling to their wintering area. They left in mid-October and arrived at their wintering areas within about 1 to 3 weeks. And so they're really moving to get down to their wintering areas. We had 2 owls that came back the next spring. So one actually came back to the site within a mile of where he was captured. He found another female, so they don't mate for life. Found another female, raised 6 chicks. And the other owl that came back actually spent the summer up about 30 miles northeast of Tonopah. So he didn't come back to the site, but did come back to Nevada. So again, without that technology, we wouldn't be able to really understand those kind of movements. Dr. Conway actually tracked an owl that was captured in Wyoming, and it went all the way down to Acapulco, Mexico to spend the winter. So that was the largest documented migration distance of a western burrowing owl. So pretty amazing. We've got 7 more transmitters that we're hoping to put out this June as well, to see if we get the same findings. So from that study, we basically found that these owls prefer burrow sites with multiple culvert and pipe burrows. We have a lot of drill pads where they did testing in the past, and they used culverts to run the wires like a conduit down to the test event sites. And the owls love those. Those burrows are, culvert burrows. Most of the breeding on the site occurs there. They like the open, sparsely vegetated area, like you see in that upper right picture. They can detect predators and also prey. And kangaroo rats, like the Merriam's kangaroo rats, actually really like that kind of disturbed habitat. And so it creates a nice food source for We found that they like crickets and grasshoppers, beetles, sun spiders, rodents, especially the kangaroo rats, and scorpions. So over half the pellets had scorpions in them. So it's amazing that they hunt the scorpions as well. We did find that they're generalist opportunistic foragers, meaning they pretty much will eat what's there. So when we compared the food habits in the different ecoregions, they were pretty much eating different things, but the dominant prey item that was found in each of those ecoregions. So really important to know, they're not focusing on just one species or a few species to forage on. We found that the cameras were a really good tool to document reproduction. We documented 37 breeding pairs and 180 young over 4 years. So that's an average of about 4.9 young per breeding pair. And that's comparable to what you see in other areas throughout Western North America. We also found that our owls are mostly migratory and spend the winter in Southern California and Baja Mexico. And all of this information helps us to protect and conserve these owls and their habitat on the site, and maybe help understand if there's mortality going on in their wintering areas. It at least identifies those areas, and maybe we can work with Mexico or other entities to try and protect their wintering habitat as well. So shifting over to mammals, we've got 30 species of small mammals. So that's things like mice and rats, rabbits, shrews, things like that. 6 species of large mammals, 9 species of carnivores, and 23 of those are sensitive or protected and regulated. So this just kind of shows you some of the small mammals that we have on the site there. As far as the large mammals go, the desert bighorn sheep, the elk, the deer, and the pronghorn antelope are all regulated as game species by the Nevada Department of Wildlife and protected under state law. The desert bighorn sheep is a really important game species in Nevada, and it's actually the Nevada state mammal. And we just recently discovered that we had a reproducing population of bighorn sheep on the site. We had a few rams sighted, but then with our mountain lion study, we actually found that the mountain lions were eating ewes and lambs. So there's about a population of about 30 sheep that seem to inhabit the western part of the site, mainly in 40 Mile Canyon, Shoshone Mountain, and Yucca Mountain. We have a few elk that come on site. Seems like just during the summertime. We've only seen bulls. We haven't seen any cows yet, so they're not resident. But they do seem to like the Gold Meadows and Rainier Mesa area. The antelope is the fastest land animal in North America. It can reach speeds of up to 60 miles per hour. And we've got population of probably about 50 to 60 of those of antelope on the site, mainly in Frenchman Flat and Yucca Flat, but they do kind of move around to some of the other areas as well. A couple of invasive species, the feral burro and the feral horse, they are protected under the Wild Horse and Burro Act, but they are not native to the area. And we are seeing an increase in population numbers and distribution of the feral burros around the Yucca Mountain and 40 Mile Canyon area. And it seems like they're impacting some of the springs like Cottonwood Spring and Twin Spring. And so it may be something that we need to address, whether fencing off the spring or something to keep them from damaging those critical wetland habitats. I mentioned bats. We have 15 bat species. Bats are actually mammals as well. They're the only truly flying mammal in the world. And my second favorite animal are animals or bats, and they're really cool. We have 15 species representing 2 families. 8 of those are sensitive or protected regulated. And since the mid-90s, we've studied bat populations on the site. We've monitored over 68 water sources, over 88 tunnels and mines and other structures. And we found 3 maternity roosts, which are really important features that we need to protect and conserve. 2 of those had Townsend's big ear bats and fringe myotis roosting together. And nearly all of the features, whether it was the mines or tunnels or water sources, were used by bats to some degree. The Brazilian free-tailed bat in the lower left gets its name from the free tail right here. So the tail membrane does not connect all the way down. That's why it's called the free tail bat. This is a migratory species, and the largest congregation of mammals known in the world is actually of this species in Bracken Cave near San Antonio, Texas. They've estimated that up to 17 million bats of that species live in that cave. The spotted bat, probably the coolest bat you'll ever see, has these striking white and black patches and these huge ears, almost half the body size. They roost in cliff areas and feed on moths. This species in Arizona has been documented to travel 80 miles round trip. It day roosts in Grand Canyon, flies about 40 miles over to the Kaibab Plateau at night to forage on the moths around some of the ponds and trees up there, and then flies back to their day roost in Grand Canyon, about an 80-mile round trip. So just an incredible distance that they travel. The pallid bat, upper right, this species, pretty cool. It actually will land on the ground and chase down its prey. One of its favorite prey items is scorpions. So whether it's burrowing owls or pallid bats, scorpions do have some natural enemies, which is maybe a good thing. Keep their population in check so they don't bother us so much. Two more species, the Townsend big-eared bat on the left and Fringe myotis on the right. These are two of the maternity roosts that we found. The one on the left is Oak Spring Butte and Twin Spring on the right. So those abandoned mine features are really important habitat for these bats. I mentioned we had 9 carnivore species. These are just some of those. So we have 3 canids. So we have the gray fox, the kit fox, as well as the coyote, and 2 felids or cats, so the bobcat and the mountain lion, and then 4 mustelids. So the badger, the long-tailed weasel, the spotted skunk, and the ringtail cat. So those are pretty cool. They pretty much, each one of those pretty much occurs throughout the site. So wide-ranging animals. So one of those, the mountain lion, is the largest carnivore that we have on the site. It's also known as cougar or puma. So all the same species. I get that question a lot. Is a cougar different than a mountain lion? The answer is no, they're all the same, just different common names. It's state regulated as a game species, and we had some opportunistic records of this species, but no formal study. And so we noticed a few sightings near active facilities. One was a dead one was found in Yucca Flat near one of the tower sites in Area 7, and had some sightings in Frenchman Flat around the spill test facility, and then a couple up by CP. So we kind of wanted to understand more about their distribution and abundance and the threat to the workers. Did they pose a risk to the workers out there? So we collaborated with Aaron Boydston and then later Kathy Longshore with USGS, really crucial collaborators in this study. And we set a bunch of cameras out around the site to look and see what we had out there and where they occurred. This also led to a radio tracking study that I'll mention here in a few minutes. What we found from our camera study is that we did have a reproducing population of mountain lions. And so we had adult males like this picture up here. We had a lactating female right here. We had family groups with female and young, and then some juveniles as well. So that told us that we had a reproducing population of mountain lions on the site. And we actually documented 6 different individual lions within a 90 square kilometer area in a 4-month period. So probably at any given time, there's anywhere between maybe 2 and 5, maybe 2 to 6 mountain lions that are kind of roaming around the site. Like I said, we collaborated with Dave Matson and Kathy Longshore for the radio tracking study, and Brian Jansen was instrumental in trapping. He was our trapper that we contracted with. Phenomenal trapper. He caught all 9 of our animals, and he was half cat himself. He had never been to the site before, and he came on site and was able to find where they roamed through the areas, and we were able to catch 9 of them and put satellite radio collars, so we were able to track them for a year and a half to 3 years. So one of the things that we looked at was their food habits. So typically these animals are moving through mostly at night, 5 to 10 miles every night. They pretty much just are constantly on the move until they make a kill, and then they'll stay on that kill from 1 to 9 days. And so when we'd see a cluster of locations where they were staying in the same area for a 12 to 24-hour period or greater, that most likely indicated they were on a kill. And so we had the coordinates that we were able to hike out to and investigate to see what they were eating. We investigated, I think it was over 400 clusters, identified 205 prey items. And lo and behold, we found that they eat primarily mule deer. About 69% of their food was made up of mule deer, and 22% were sheep, and then a few other species as well. But primarily mule deer and sheep. And what we found was there was kind of a seasonality component to it, where they were eating, I mean, they ate both species throughout the year, but you can see during the winter and spring, they were eating primarily bighorn sheep. And then shift to the fall or the summer and the fall, it's kind of that June through October, they were eating primarily mule deer. And that was kind of a neat thing to find out. One of the things that we learned was the mule deer will, in the fall, they will migrate off of the higher country, like Piute Mesa and Rainier Mesa, where they spend most of the summer. They'll migrate off to the lower elevations, and that's where you find the desert bighorn sheep. So the mountain lions will follow the deer off to the lower elevations where the sheep are, and they're able to hunt more bighorn sheep. Also, for the lambing period, the bighorn sheep will drop their lambs primarily in December through February. And so the lambs provide a nice food source for the mountain lions. Then about April, May, the mule deer migrate back up to the high country, up onto the mesas. The mountain lions follow them, and they start dropping their fawns about mid-May to mid-June. And so again, a nice food source for the lions to prey upon. So they kind of have that seasonality with the lambs in the winter and spring, and the fawns in the summer and fall. So a pretty nice system for the mountain lions here to find enough to eat. We also looked at their movements and home ranges. And so the upper right here, you can kind of see there's kind of different colors. It kind of gets pretty muddied in here, but there's 4 individuals that are kind of sharing this area. This is Rainier Mesa and the upper elevations of Piute Mesa. That's the high country where the mule deer are spending their summertime. And so that's kind of the core habitat for mountain lions on the site. But the other thing it shows that they're pretty much using these mountainous, remote, rugged terrain areas away from the active facilities are kind of over in this area. So that was good to see that. You might get an occasional one that roams around active facilities, but it's really rare that happens. Again, one of the really neat things we found was male number 3 was caught over on the west part of the site. Within about 3 weeks, he was over on the west side of Death Valley, almost to the Inyo Mountains. Came up here to Gold Mountain, and then back over to the site where he made a kill on Shoshone Mountain, and then back over, and he was found dead at the base of a 100-foot cliff in Dry Bone Canyon in the Cottonwood Mountains in Death Valley. So he covered about 1,500 square miles in a 4-month period. One of the largest documented home ranges of a mountain lion. So just an amazing movement. And without the satellite technology, we wouldn't have been able to understand those kind of movements. And again, like I say, it was a collaborative effort with USGS and Brian Jansen that helped us learn all about all that. If you go online or if you look in Wikipedia or Webster's Dictionary and you look up the definition of cute, this is what you should find. This was a 2-week-old mountain lion cub that belonged to female number 1, and we went out to Ken Osler and I went out to investigate a kill site that we thought was where he'd made a kill, where she had made a kill, and Kent found this cute little guy, and we got some really great video and pictures of it. So again, I always have to throw that slide in because it is a great picture. So just kind of wrapping up in conclusion, the Nevada National Security Site really is a national ecological treasure. It provides habitat for an incredibly diverse suite of plant and animal species. And I count myself lucky and blessed to be able to spend time out there and actually study and learn a little bit about some of these animals and plants. So thank you for your time and attention. Appreciate it. The mother, we're not sure where she was at. She was not too far away, but we don't know exactly where. We didn't spend a lot of time. So back to you, Joe.
Thank you so much, Derek. Could you please turn off the share screen?
So I'll stop share. Okay.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So before we go to questions, I was wondering, we were having a little bit of technical issues, and I do thank you all so much for your patience. We greatly appreciate it. As we mentioned at the start, this is our first time doing it. So Derek, I was wondering if you'd be, if you'd like to take us through the specimens, and we can follow with our second camera. So that way, those who weren't able to see it on stream will be able to see some of the animal specimens that you have.
All right, camera.
Yeah, go through the. So yeah, go through some of the specimens. Is that still? Yeah, that is a badger. Yep. Hang on a second.
Some of them have little different markers on their head.
There we go. Sorry about that. Joel.
Test.
Still getting the feedback. This. There we go. I think we got it solved. So this is a red-tailed hawk. This is the most common raptor species that we have on the site. It's found in all areas of the site. And this little guy, it's an immature juvenile, and so we're not sure how he died. We think he might have flown into a building or something, unfortunately. This is a roadrunner. This is one of the species that's found also kind of throughout the site, and it feeds on lizards and snakes. It will actually kill and eat rattlesnakes as well with these sharp beak. Would rather run than fly. That's why it's called the roadrunner. Then we have the western burrowing owl here. I talked quite a bit about that species that we have on the site. This is the gopher snake. So again, one of the most common snakes that we have on the site. Kind of unique. It's like a rattlesnake wannabe. So if you look at the markings on it, it looks similar to a rattlesnake. It will coil up and actually wiggle its tail like a rattlesnake, and it will make a sound with its mouth that sounds like a rattlesnake rattling. So definitely kind of a rattlesnake wannabe. This is the chuckwalla. Talked a little bit about that. This is the adult form. Doesn't have the banded tail like the juvenile. This is a kit fox. So this inhabits mainly the lower elevation areas around Mojave Desert and transition areas. The gray fox, its close cousin, is found more often up in the forested areas up around the mesas and the higher elevations. Got a sampling here of some of our small mammals with a desert wood rat or pack rat. We've got the spotted skunk here. We've got 4 species of kangaroo rats and the pocket gopher. Right there, you can kind of see it's kind of torpedo shaped, really strong claws, digs really fast, a very efficient digger. Also have several species of our bats here, not all the species in here, but several of them. Small-footed myotis, California myotis, long-legged myotis, long-eared myotis, and another long-legged myotis, and the pallid bat. So the pallid bat's the one that will land on the ground and chase down its prey like scorpions. This is the ringtail cat, also known as the miner's cat. It is most closely related to the raccoon, although it's not a raccoon, but it does have the striped tail like the raccoon. It's actually in its own family, the Bassariskidae family. And this is the badger. Again, a very efficient digger. It's found throughout the site. If you look at the claws here, you can see that it can move a lot of dirt really quick. And you definitely don't want to get in a fight with this guy. And it eats primarily the small rodents. And this is the bobcat. The other felid besides the mountain lion that we have on the site. We don't have any lynx on site. It is just the bobcat, but very beautiful animals. There's some different color phases, kind of a reddish orange phase that we found in 40 Mile Canyon. And this is more of just kind of the traditional color phase. So hopefully that helps, Joe, and it's what you're looking for.
That's perfect. Thank you so much, Derek. I just knew we had some people who weren't able to see the animals, so that is perfect. Thank you so much for doing that. That's great for those watching from home. And next, we'll get into the questions. So I know we have some in chat and some that people have submitted. So the first one I want to ask you is one that we get all the time, and we're going to ask this in terms of the animals and plants at the site is, how dangerous is the site? I know that's kind of a very, broad question, right? What is dangerous, right? So they're talking more about the radiation, but in terms of the plants and animals, is there anything that you've noticed, that is, elevated or anything like that? That's just the first question we have right now.
Okay, can you hear me okay, or do I need to?
You sound great.
You can hear me okay now?
Yep, you sound great.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And honestly, probably from a human safety standpoint, probably the most dangerous, if you want to call it, the most risk that you'd experience is probably with a rattlesnake. Being bit by one of those, most of the time it doesn't kill you. It obviously could, but it can get you pretty sick. And so I would say rattlesnakes would pose the biggest threat to humans. And so we do safety topics and safety presentations, and basically it's just being aware of your surroundings. And that goes for working at the site or going for a hike out at Red Rock Canyon or off in the desert somewhere, especially now where it's warming up, the reptiles are becoming active, the snakes are going to be coming out of hibernation. So it's just really important to just be vigilant, watch where you're stepping, watch where you're putting your hands. So I would say that's the biggest threat. We have bees and wasps, and so if you are allergic to those, that can also prevent or also maybe present a potential threat. We've looked at West Nile virus. We don't have a whole lot of mosquitoes, but we do have some. A couple of those tested positive for West Nile virus, but again, the threat is extremely low. We've looked at hantavirus as well. And again, that's a pretty low threat, but again, it's something you want to be cautious of. If you're going into an enclosed area that hasn't been used in a long time and you see rodent feces, you want to get some bleach and bleach that before you really spend a lot of time and kick up the dust in there.
That's great advice, Derek. Thank you. Yeah, that's just great advice in general. Just be aware of your surroundings, regardless of it's, wherever you are, but especially at the site where, it's especially if you're on a tour or things like that, it's always good to know that. Now, one of the questions we have, which I think is a great one, is that you mentioned that you tag some of the species to identify their movements, but do you conduct any further geospatial analysis or modeling, such as hotspot analysis?
So one of the things we did look at was core use, and I didn't go into great detail, but with our mountain lion study as well as our bighorn sheep study, we actually collared sheep as well. kind of those darker colored areas are their core use areas, where they spent most of their time, and then the lighter color areas that expanded out from that was more of their overall home range use. But we've done a little bit of modeling. We're still kind of analyzing those data as well. Something that we do want to look at to kind of predict where the potential habitat is. So it's nice that we have those data points to show where they were found, and now maybe we can extrapolate some of that to potential habitat where they also might occur or move into.
Perfect, thank you. Now, one of the questions we've gotten before we started this presentation with you is, what would happen if, because we know there's a lot of craters out at the site, and from the testing went on out there, I should say. Is there any threat that poses to the animals, or have they gotten to the point where they kind of just know to stay away, or is there is there like a chance that they might fall in, or is it an instinct where they know to avoid those craters?
So yeah, with the craters, we actually find that species use those. So the rabbits, even coyotes, small mammals will actually use those craters as habitat. Sometimes the bottom of those craters will fill up, or will collect some water, and so it'll provide a drinking source for them. So most of those, the animals are definitely adept enough at going through those. There's not too many that have sheer drop-offs. There's usually enough room for them to move around. So I don't think it poses too much of a threat. As far as the residual radiation, there's been a lot of studies done historically on that. Ron Warren heads up the group that kind of focuses on radiological impacts to the fauna and flora, the plants and animals. So we do kind of track that. And what we found is there's really, while there in some places there's a little bit of residual radiation, it does not pose a threat to the animals or plants that are on the site.
That's perfect. Thank you for going into that. I appreciate you talking about the radiation thing, and but yeah, and with the craters themselves, I hadn't thought about it being a potential habitat and location for them to to live. So it's really interesting to hear that side of it. Now I do have a question here as well. Can you tell us what passerine means, or Passerin?
Sorry, yeah, a passerine is that's a family of birds. It's also known as the perching birds. So they're generally the smaller birds, but even the common raven is considered a passerine. So it's an order of birds called the passerines, or the perching birds. So it's just one of the ways that scientists or biologists categorize birds into the passerine order.
Thank you for clearing that up. I appreciate it. So we do have time for some more questions if anybody has anything to ask. But thank you so much for going over the individual animals that you brought along, and for going into depth about what plants and animals live out on this site. That's fascinating. We get that question a lot, especially when they see our mountain lion and other things that we have in the main gallery of the museum. Is they don't think about the site in a way where naturally there's people who call it home. And so it's great to have this chance to speak with you to really show them that, even though it's a government facility and there's these tests that happened decades ago, that this is a home for a lot of creatures and for plants. So it's kind of seeing it as a whole, instead of just this one purpose of the site. It's actually a home for creatures. So that's fantastic. And I'll give our audience here chance to ask questions. I don't know if we want to see if anybody in the theater has any questions for Derek, to see if they have anything they want to ask him.
Okay. Yeah, the question was, do we have ravens or other scavenging birds on the site? And the answer is yes. The common raven is found throughout the site. I've actually seen flocks of like 50 to 60 at a time. So tremendous congregations of ravens. That's one species that has actually thrived in the Mojave Desert as people have come in and inhabited it over the last 30 to 40 years. I can't remember the estimates, but their populations have increased in the 1,000%. And they are creating some problems with sage grouse, as well as desert tortoises, and they're one of the major predators on young desert tortoises. And so Fish and Wildlife Service is really looking at that, trying to figure out ways to control raven populations. A couple of years ago, we actually had an active raven nest, and we found 20 tortoise carcasses ranging in size from a hatchling up to maybe a 5-year-old tortoise underneath that nest. So in one, breeding event, that pair of ravens killed as many tortoises as we do on roads in 20 years. So that is one really big concern that we are trying to estimate populations. We do winter raptor surveys, and we actually count how many ravens that we see and look at their distribution, and then try and put anti-perching devices or things like that on some of the power lines, so to try and prevent them from nesting or being there, especially in tortoise habitat. We also have the turkey vulture that's also a scavenger, and we see those are found throughout the site as well. Not in as great numbers as the ravens, but we do have them as well. And one of the things that we found was when we were doing our kill site investigation with the mountain lions, and as we found other carcasses of dead animals, roadkill or things like that, they don't last very long. So within a matter of a couple of days, there's not much left. And that's mainly due to coyotes scavenging, or turkey vultures or ravens that are coming and taking advantage of that free food. Great question.
Do we have any other questions for Derek? Either those in the chat or those in person. Do we have any other questions for him?
Not in here.
Okay. Well, I haven't seen anything pop up. So Derek, I want to thank you so much on behalf of the National Atomic Testing Museum, a board of trustees with the Nevada Test Site Historical Foundation. It was wonderful having you here and learning more about, like I said, those creatures and plants that call the test site or the Nevada National Security Site home. And thank you all so much for watching from home or watching in person. It was a joy to have you here today. So Derek, thank you so much. You have a wonderful day, and thank you everybody for watching.
Thanks.